Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Meant for More Conversations with me, your host, Sarah Alley. I am so excited to have my friend Sarah Lustig here, and she's such an incredible, powerful woman, and I love that we're going to have this conversation. I have heard many of you express excitement about today's conversation and talking about empaths and HSPs, highly sensitive people. And so many of you right now are having conversations yourself around what exactly is an empath. You're maybe uncovering right now for yourself that you're an empath, or you heard this term highly sensitive person and you realized, could that possibly be me? And I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with people with a growing awareness around what this term being an empath is and being a highly sensitive person. You might be listening tonight and be like, Sarah, this is right up my alley. This is everything I love. This is who I am. Maybe you have questions tonight and you're like, I want to know more. I want to understand more about this. Maybe you're here wanting to learn more about yourself. I welcome you to, post your questions in the comment section, because we are here to dive into this conversation with you and explore this sea of being an empath and a highly sensitive person. So if you would help me welcome my good friend Sarah, and we're just going to dive right on in, you guys. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you tonight. Hi, Sarah.
Hi, thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, I'm so glad to have you. Thanks for being willing to to dive into this topic. I had been, we connected here on social media, and it was just like a genuine, I love everything she writes. Like, I want to connect with her. And I just saw you posting a lot of things about being an empath and HSP. And so I'm like, this is perfect, because I have been so wanting to jump into this conversation and explore it. And I know I'm not the only one. So I'm really happy that you're willing to do this with me tonight.
Absolutely. Yes, me too. It's a good conversation to have, especially right now.
Yeah, especially right now. We're gonna get there for sure. Would you introduce yourself to people and let them know who you are and what you do and why empaths and HSPs?
Yes, absolutely. So my name is Sarah Lustig. I am a licensed counselor, in the state of Colorado. I'm also a holistic coach and a spiritual coach. So my coaching work is a little bit different than my therapy work in the sense that it's much more expansive. We're talking about, much more than just mental health and mental health challenges. And really, this work for me came out of being an empath and a highly sensitive person. I grew up in a very chaotic household, and there was a lot of enmeshed boundaries, enmeshed emotions. And I often felt like there was something wrong with me. I had a ton of anxiety growing up. I had depression most of my life. I felt very overwhelmed most days. I didn't seem to function the way that other people functioned in the world. And so it really set me on a path of like finding out what's wrong with me. Like that was really what was going on. I was like, what's wrong with me? But it came down to recognizing, oh, there's nothing wrong with me, that I actually have this gift that most people in the world around me don't have, which is why it's hard for me to kind of fit in sometimes or feel comfortable in different situations. And so really understanding these parts of myself even more, I was like, whoa, this is life-changing for me to understand this and understand that there isn't anything wrong with me, and then I can actually work with this. But then also just naturally seeing my clients, these gifts show up in them, these sensitivities show up in them, and helping them manage these and not be so overwhelmed, not have so much anxiety.
Yeah. Okay, let's just dive into these sensitivities. What exactly does it mean to be an empath? And if you could explain the difference between an empath and empathy, because people interchange those two things together and they are different things.
Yes.
Correct?
Absolutely, yes. So having empathy is the ability to imagine what it might feel like for somebody else. So kind of that idea of like walking in somebody else's shoes. What would it feel like to be homeless? You know, what would it feel like to sleep on the streets and not have a warm, safe place to go to at night? So we can imagine that, and that's the idea of having empathy. An empath is somebody who actually feels what that person is feeling. They can feel the pain of what it feels like to be homeless. They can feel the pain of somebody having a migraine around them. They might start to get migraine pains in their head because they are picking up on that person's pain. They are going to feel angry when other people around them are angry. They're going to feel anxious when other people around them are anxious. So it's really about actually physically feeling the sensations, the thoughts, the emotions of other people around them.
Okay. What are the sensibilities of an empath? So part of the being able to sense the feelings of other people, what else might be indicators or indications of for an empath?
Yeah. These people are extremely intuitive. They are often clairsentient, so being able to really feel the energies, the emotions of things around them, both human and non-human. So they can pick up like, you know, vibrations of animals and things like that. They can pick up vibrations of other plant life and things like that. So they're deeply feeling people. They can often sense other people's moods. They can sense when somebody is having low energy. Like, say a person walks into a room and they're feeling down, but they're putting on this kind of facade like, oh, everything's great. An empath can see right that. So they're able to discern when somebody's not being genuine. And, you know, we might not be genuine for reasons to protect ourselves. Like maybe we don't want everybody to know that we're having a bad day, but an empath can see through that, and they can, you know, kind of read somebody's words to see is there honesty behind this, or is there illusion, deception behind this?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, so in the perception, right, of what is and what's being experienced, I think often there's this conversation about, you know, like taking on other people's emotions or taking on the space, right, and taking on that energy. And I know that you've talked a lot about different ways of clearing energy, or like protection of your own energy around other places. But could we talk about that piece around taking on people's energy? And is that something that just happens? Like, I like to believe that empaths and HSPs are empowered. You know, it's like we have the power to understand what we can, or have the power of what we take on and what we don't, like what we own and what we don't, we choose not to own. And so I'm curious to you about how do we tread this place of, you know, not taking on this thing of like, I take on people's energy and therefore it's like so hard, versus a place of empowerment of, you know, how I can really stand in my power, knowing that this is where I am, and the ability to navigate the world when you have these kinds of sensitivities.
Mm-hmm. So I think it really comes down to recognition. To recognize, A, that we are an empath and that we have these extra kind of abilities and sensitivities, and then how do we manage them? And it's going to be different for each person because we're unique people and what we need is different. Yeah. But generally, the two big things that make the difference between an empowered empath versus a disempowered empath are self-care and boundaries. What needs to be a part of self-care is grounding our energy every day, being able to spend time by ourselves so that we can actually know what our own energy feels like. Because so often empaths are just like these sponges picking up other people's energy. Right. They don't actually know what their own energy feels like without the interference of anybody else. So it's spending time in our own energy, feeling how that feels, getting familiar with that, practicing grounding, being present and safe in our body every single day, so that when we do go out into the world, we can tell immediately when we're feeling, you know, off kilter, when we're starting to absorb somebody else's energy and we're no longer in our own energy field.
Oh, I love that. This piece about grounding. So when you're talking about being with yourself, or right, getting comfortable with being alone, and I don't I have I know a lot. I have a lot of friends who are empathic people, empaths, and they typically, like, there can be a not allowing yourself the space to be alone,
Yeah,
right? And could that I could see that being a function of, like, anxiety or discomfort, right? With maybe
absolutely.
loneliness or being alone.
Mhm.
And I see this as a common thread. Would you see this as a common thread? Could you explain
Absolutely.
why this thing
Yeah,
around
absolutely.
loneliness
And
is so present for people?
yes, I think I'll speak for myself here.
Yeah.
And I will say for myself, I know that it has been easier for me to be in other people's emotions and helping them with their emotions than it has
Yeah.
been to be like, wait, I have to face mine here. Like that. I want to help them. I'd much rather help other people than have to look at my own. So I think that's very true for empaths is when we are forced to kind of spend time by ourselves and to see our own energy, we also have to start to acknowledge how we have to take responsibility for taking on other people's stuff, how we tend to burn ourselves out because it's like it's so much easier to help them than it is to be with their
Right.
stuff. And so yes,
Right.
I think it is challenging for empaths to like really sit and be with what is ours because we are so used to taking care of everybody else. Empaths are huge caretakers, we're huge fixers, healers. Like we just want to make everything better for other people because
Yeah.
we know what it feels like to be carrying those emotions and we don't want to be doing that. So it's a little bit of like us trying to avoid some of that, but
Yes.
also we burn ourselves out in taking it on.
Yes. Um, I know for me, what was eye-opening was this, like, creating distractions. So, like, when we're talking about what it is to be an empowered empath versus being disempowered, and I've had conversations, whether it's somebody who I've, like, worked with and supported, or if it was a friend who was going through, a challenge, is this feeling of, like, being distracted from showing up in your own life,
Yeah.
right? Like, actually, like, what is behind the curtain so often can be the fear um of, like, stepping forward, right? And how we can tap into our gifts or our purpose, or maybe there's, like, the anxiety of not knowing what that purpose is,
Mhm.
right? Or the deep criticism that we might have. And I would like to talk about what, like, those core wounds, right? And how they operate, where this empath, these sensitivities come from, right? Like the root of those. But the distraction I found, even for myself, was like, I was creating relationships and events and going to do things and supporting other people and stuff like that as this, as a distraction, because I was actually really afraid of 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 being alone and
Mhm.
getting to know myself and doing that self-study work, because it's important to grow that connection to and understand where your sensitivities are coming from. Would you
Mhm.
say?
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. And I think that's a big difference between an empowered and a disempowered empath is empowered empaths know themselves. They know what their triggers are. They don't avoid their triggers. They just know how to manage those triggers when they show up because they've done the work of looking at themselves and recognizing like, okay, here is where I end and here is where the rest of the world begins. And there's
Mhm,
that, clear differentiation. It doesn't
mhm,
have to be like a physical boundary that's there, but there is an understood boundary of I am my own person and I
mhm.
am not responsible for other people's emotions, thoughts, feelings, values, beliefs, energy.
Right. Right, exactly. Can we talk about how is an empath and highly sensitive person, like, what is the starting or the beginning of that? Is it rooted in conditioning that creates that? Or do we come in having certain gifts, like, and uncovering those things? What is this about being an empath and HSP?
Yeah. So first, I just want to define highly sensitive person a little bit more.
Yeah.
They're different than empath, and I think that will help here. So a highly sensitive person is different than an empath in that they are not feeling the feelings of other people. They're not taking on that pain. They're not feeling the sensations of other people. However, highly sensitive people are more susceptible to the different dynamics of their environment. So, for example, overhead lights might be very overwhelming for a highly sensitive person, or going to a concert where there's a lot of loud sounds and there's a lot of people around. That can be very overwhelming to them. They're not picking up the emotions of the people in the crowd, but just all of that kind of stimulation is overwhelming for them. Different textures or like jeans might be very uncomfortable for them, or different kind of restrictive textures or things like that can be overwhelming for highly sensitive people. They can often just feel like very on edge. They can feel energy shifts in a room. They're not necessarily picking up the energy, but they can feel like, whoa, something just changed here. And then their perceptions are going to be like, what happened here that changed? So they're feeling those subtle energy shifts.
Okay.
For that reason, highly sensitive people can tend to be a little bit more isolative. They can tend to want to be a little bit more on their own, or they just can value more intimate settings with smaller groups of people that are a little bit quieter, not restaurants where like the music is blasting. I myself have actually had to leave a movie theater before because it was so loud that it was physically hurting my chest. Like I was uncomfortable in that space and I had to leave.
Yeah.
So highly sensitive people they're more sensitive. They're not necessarily picking up and feeling themselves, the emotions of others. So that's kind of the big difference.
Okay.
And then where these come from. So I think empaths and highly sensitive people are naturally just born that way, that some people are just born with a deeper sense of feeling, right? And a deeper emotional intelligence. And some people are just born having more sensitivities. I also believed that both of these can be shaped through childhood experiences, and specifically trauma. Growing up for me, yes, I was already sensitive. Yes, I was already able to pick up on other people's emotions around me, but then certain things happening in my life, like, for example, hearing my parents, yelling and arguing with each other. I started laying awake at night, like tuned into that in those discussions, and what was the tone of voice and what were the words that were being used, and really like listening with serious intent. And as a child, I started to internalize that, and I became very good at distinguishing people's tone of voice based on what they were saying, based on what was going on. Were they seeming to be, kind and open-hearted, but there was an edge there that made me suggest like there was an ulterior motive to this.
Right. Yeah.
And so as a child, I developed that sense by listening very, very intently and deeply. That's been tremendous as a therapist in my life, but it's also caused pain at times because I'm hearing things that other people are not saying to me, because I'm really picking up on the underlying truth of what's going on. And so I will know something at times before somebody has come to tell me that thing about themselves. And that can create some challenges, and obviously challenges and boundaries. So that's another reason why for empaths, it is important to recognize like when we're taking something on, and if it's even our right to be like just taking that on, like, whoa, maybe that person doesn't want me to know that about them yet. And they're not comfortable sharing that with me. So I don't want to just assume and be like, oh, here, I can see this about you.
Right. So with those in some ways what you're saying is that it's like a trauma response is one way of growing these sensitivities or these abilities. And it could be a combination of both, right? That are also going on of what you come in with and also your environment.
Yes.
I love to because so much of what we talk about here are things from a very soulful level. And I think I'm navigating this piece around the trauma that people can experience, right? That can create or deepen these abilities or these sensitivities, right? It's like commonly known that empaths and HSPs have typically come from backgrounds that do have a lot of tumultuous challenging times or abuse and trauma in their past, right? And maybe more so than others. And for me, what I've uncovered is as I've reflected on the trauma that I've gone through, that so much of it has informed me into who I am today and my ability to assist and help others, my ability to be a voice that advocates, right? And the activism that I carry. And that's the thing I love about you, Sarah, is also there's such a heart around activism and the work that you do. Would you be willing to share a little bit maybe about like the sole purpose element around, having a really hard past and how that is with the value added to who we are now and why it's important to come into the empowered place of as an empath and an HSP?
I think that it's such a great question. I think highly sensitive people and empaths are more susceptible to trauma because of their sensitivities, because of their desire to always be helping other people. Sometimes that means we're helping people who aren't going to help us back, who aren't capable of helping us back.
Yeah.
And that can be trauma. That can be wounding of like, here we are always supporting, we're not ever getting supported back. That can leave us, very open and susceptible to other things going on in which we don't have safety and security and support around. So I do think there's an element that makes these people much more susceptible to having traumatic experiences. But I also think that that's partly because of the kind of soul contracts that empaths and highly sensitive people have taken on.
Yeah.
I know that's definitely been true for myself, that I learned this term when I was in graduate school called the wounded healer. And it was like, oh my God, that's what I am. Like, there it is. Who knew? And so the idea of that is somebody who's been wounded, who's experienced a lot of wounding in their life, taking that, finding empowerment through that, and turning it around to help other people through their experiences. And I think of, Viktor Frankl is such a great example of this, Man's Search for Meaning. He survived the Holocaust, like one of the most atrocious experiences that we know of.
Right.
And yet he then used that experience to help other people and help other people better their lives. And so understanding that idea of the wounded healer and reading, his book too was crucial in my life for being able to say, this isn't a curse. Like, yes, these bad things happen to me, and this is a great quote by Maya Angelou that I'll throw in here. This is a quote that jump-started my own healing. I can be changed by the things that happen to me, but I refuse to be reduced by them.
Ooh,
and it was this first idea of like, I'm not less than because these things have happened to me, that it actually makes me more than. It helps me be more resilient. It helps me be stronger. It helps me be confident in more ways because I look what I've overcome. Like, look where how much I've grown in my life.
Yeah.
So I think that for empaths who have experienced trauma, being able to sit with their stories and sit with their experiences and not minimize the pain or not invalidate that pain, but be with that pain, acknowledge that pain, and okay, how can I live with this pain? Because even though we let things go, we let go of our emotional attachment to the pain, but it's always a part of our history. It's always a part of us. It shaped us. And so we can get to a place where we actually honor that pain and honor the experiences that we've been through, appreciate them even. Not everybody has to be there, but I consider them at the place where I can appreciate the bad things that have happened in my life because they allow me to show up with my clients so much more authentically. Like, I can really hold their hand and walk through them with the fire because I've walked through that fire too.
Right. When it comes to HSPs and empaths, and thank you for diving into that first, because that was a good setup. And understanding that there's a difference between the two, and one can be an empath and an HSP, but it is possible for an HSP to not be an empath.
Yes.
Right.
There are, so as far as we can tell, the numbers that I have seen, there are 2 to 4% of the population, and I think it's probably more like 8%, is empaths, whereas 8 to 20% of the population is considered highly sensitive person.
Interesting. And then I'm curious for like the fact that this is like if we look at the population and those percentages that you talked about, right? Like that it's kind of like a niche in a way, right? It's a segment. But one of the questions I've been thinking about is everybody, like, does everybody have the potential to be an empath?
Yes, I think so. And
Yeah.
I think we are already seeing a growth in empaths because we're going through a spiritual awakening. And
Yes.
so people are awakening to their empathy, to their
Yes.
ability to have these sensitivities without needing to numb it. A similarity between highly sensitive people and empaths is that we often see addiction. We often see numbing behaviors because they are so sensitive, because they have these deeper awarenesses about life. It's overwhelming. There's a great quote by Eric Fromm. One cannot be deeply responsive to the world without being saddened very often.
Yes.
Yes, empaths and highly sensitive people struggle with anxiety and depression because they are so much more aware. They're seeing not just like the 3 levels of pain that somebody's experiencing, they're seeing the 10 levels of pain that are existing in our collective.
Right.
So like that can be really heavy at times and very overwhelming.
Yes. And what are the ways that, if someone right now is well, let's just talk about kind of the awakening process. Where you are right now, for those of you who are tuning in, or if you catch us on the replay, when it comes to the awakening process, what are some of the indicators that you are awakening? First and foremost, it might be what has brought you to watching this right now, right? But yeah, what are some of the things that might be a part of that awakening process? I could definitely share my own experiences, but I'd love to hear from you what you've noticed and the people that you're working with.
Yeah, I think it's a hunger for truth. Wanting to see beyond the kind of illusion that we've been living in for so long. I think I'm seeing a like real deep desire to understand themselves better, and a recognition that what they thought about life thus far is like not making sense anymore, and what people told them to believe about life is just not making sense to people anymore. And so there's this real confusion about like, wait, this is what I was told, but it doesn't add up. Like, it's not, I don't feel that. Like, there's something off here. And so I think the recognition of like something is not right here. And then this deep desire to figure out what is it and what is the truth? What is going on here? I think a lot of people have been living in pain for so long, and the pandemic like really forced people to look at their environments and the people in their environment, and is this actually bringing me happiness? Like, what am I working towards? What am I working for 40, 60, 80 hours a week? And I think it really like forced people to slow down, to take a look at themselves and recognize like, I'm not actually happy. Like, this is not actually the life that I have is not the life that I want. And in figuring out where that missing part is, like, where's that gap and how do I get to that life that I want? I think that's a big part of the beginning of people's spiritual awakenings that I've been seeing.
Yes. I resonate with so much of that. And when it comes to awakening, it can be like an instant, but it also can be waves, right? Like you can go through different patterns and series of awakenings over time, correct?
Yes. Yeah. I consider these, and I'm sure you've heard this term before, the dark nights of the soul.
Yes.
Yes, we have our spiritual awakening that might last 3 to 5 years. And then during that, we're having these dark nights of the soul, which is this like ego death, this, death of who we used to be, these different parts of ourselves, so that new parts of ourselves can really show up, so that we can, let go of that heaviness, let go of the parts that have made us, create a cage around our hearts and just like close us up.
Yes. And what I'm coming to understand too for myself is so much the story, right? The story of of the pain, the story of the wounds that either were like rejected, disowned, casted aside, repressed, suppressed, right? And because so much of that past is informing of the person who you are today, that compartmentalizing things or suppressing them or disowning them, while it can feel like that is a way of protection, right, to move forward, what I've come to understand myself going through my own awakening process is that it's got to come out. It's got to come out. It's got to be seen. It's got to be experienced and felt. And because it is a part of who you are. And so much of the awakening process is the union of the parts of you so that you can become whole, right?
Yeah. I think so. Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt.
Go ahead.
That empaths often avoid feelings because they're so overwhelming to them.
Yeah.
And that really delays their ability to heal, because it's feeling our emotions and how we heal. We have to feel it to heal it, like that. You know, that saying says, and sometimes as a therapist, I get annoyed about that, but it's like, it is so true. We have to feel it.
Yeah.
And so I like to think about our feelings as like a conveyor belt for a shipping facility. Is like, we feel it, we process it, we let it go. We send it out. We send it back to the universe.
Yeah.
We feel it, we process it, we let it go. What ends up happening is we don't like to process it. So we start piling those boxes up and piling them up. And eventually it's going to spill over onto the conveyor belt. We're not going to be able to process anything anymore. There's going to be a big explosion. The machine's going to fall. And that's when we have our breakdowns.
Right. And those breakdowns can lead to breakthroughs, right?
Yes. Yeah, sometimes they definitely can.
So when we're talking about shadow work, because it's so much part of this dark night of the soul and coming into your power, what's the most important maybe tools or resources that people can do as far as working with this shadow work and coming into their power?
I recommend that when somebody's doing shadow work, they are doing that in conjunction with another person. So whether it's seeing a therapist, whether it's working with a coach, whether it's working with a shaman or somebody in Reiki. But shadow work is not easy. It's not comfortable. It's looking at our most wounded parts. It's looking at our most afraid parts. It's looking at our disowned parts that we have shunned and separated from. So we need another person there to help us validate these parts are not bad. These parts are not wrong. We need to hear that. We need to see another person loving these parts, showing up for these parts, being warm and kind and compassionate to these parts. So I think it's really important to work with another person. That being said, yes, you can do your shadow work by yourself, but it's painful, and being in community is so much more comfortable. But I think journaling is a huge way to be able to look at our shadow parts, being able to see our own handwriting, talk about these different parts, explore these different parts with compassion, without judgment. Our shadow parts may seem scary because shadow, what, dark, right?
Yeah.
But they're actually the key to the most beautiful untapped parts of us. Like, that is where all of our untapped potential lives. It's where there's so much, creativity and inspiration in those parts that we haven't kind of been taking advantage of. So doing shadow work is, I can speak for myself, this was the most crucial part of my own healing as a person, as a therapist, to be able to really show up for my clients. That I think for all of us, especially being in a spiritual awakening, being aware of that, wanting to live a spiritual life, doing our shadow work is crucial for that.
Yes. When it comes to this, I see the rise of the empath, because it does feel as though there's an awakening happening at a larger level of people coming into empathy. And I was at a conference. This was probably about a couple of years ago, and it was at my alma mater, and the dean was talking about a conference that he had gone to for like I was like IT software kind of conference. But what they talked about was that the future, right? The future of business, the future of industry was going to be centered around human connection, and that what was going to be critical was empathy. And so he talks so much about the importance of empathy and emotional intelligence and opening and blossoming into that. And so I know that, we can hear the jargon about, 3D to 5D and 4D and all, this, but regardless of that jargon, in the most simplest term that I understood within myself was that we're moving from this place of logic and ration, right, to a place of actual feeling and heart and empathy.
Yes. Heart center, for sure.
Yes. And that this is why it's important. And this is why we're seeing this rise right now, that this is so much connected to the role of empaths and HSPs, is because there's a trajectory of us coming into this heart-centered space, because this is the space that really transforms and creates the change that I think we were really looking for and making in this world, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. There's been a huge disconnect from head to heart, and that's a lot of what I work with my clients on, is like connecting these two up again and moving out of the head right now. Like, we've all been so head-based.
Yeah.
We're connecting, yes, through online. Like, that is a lot of thought going into that. And we're not feeling this so much right now.
Yeah.
And so, getting back into being in person with each other, it's going to be challenging for empaths and highly sensitive people because they've been living in this safe little bubble for the last year and a half. And so stepping out of that bubble is like...
And cocooning and hermity. Yeah.
Yeah, for a lot of introverted, highly sensitive empaths, like, the pandemic was great for them. Great. Like, I finally get to just live my life. This is wonderful. But it's also, we don't want to avoid our triggers. We want to know what our triggers are. We want to know how to manage them. For me, loud noises are my trigger. So I carry earplugs with us or with myself now wherever I go. I know that, so that I can be prepared if there are going to be loud noises around me.
Yes. Yeah, it's so interesting. What other ways can empaths and HSPs like help take care or self-care when it comes to just like a lot of the change and transition and energy that's happening right now? Because we are kind of in a large mourning or grieving process right now.
We're in a huge collective grief process, for sure. And empaths are going to feel that, and we're going to feel a little more heavy, a little more drained. Most of us, especially most of us in the spiritual world, are doing a lot of transmuting of energies collectively right now. So you may not be aware of that being an empath, but unconsciously you're probably transmuting a lot of energy right now. So I recommend daily grounding. This can include smudging. So burning sage, burning Palo Santo, burning rosemary, burning rose petals, sweetgrass, any of those to kind of cleanse the energy in your space every single day. You can use an aura spray. I have made one for myself, and it's a combination of frankincense, ylang ylang, rose water,
water water,
lemongrass, and I'm missing one other ingredient, I think. But I can type it up to you and post it on the notes. But so I made it my own.
Smells delicious.
I spray it on every single day. And when I spray it on, I say to myself, I am always honored. I'm always seen. I'm always respected. That way I'm taking that intention into my day. I'm taking that out into the world. And then I know that people are going to show up who are going to honor me and respect me and appreciate me.
Yes. Can we talk about the how empaths can often attract people who are emotionally unavailable, or people who are not like just energy that might not feel good to be around, and why that attraction piece is is common or typical, and why being intentional about our energy and about what we're attracting can be helpful with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Because empaths are such like lovers and helpers and fixers,
Mm-hmm.
we will often attract people that we have to fix, that we have to like help, and like that we're working to try to change to improve their life. We're not doing it for us.
Yeah.
In some ways, because we're trying to avoid feeling their bad feelings, negative feelings, but mostly we're doing it for them. We know as empaths how overwhelming it feels, how painful it feels to be, on the receiving end of, people's anger, people's judgments, their projections. So we are trying constantly not to do that to everybody else in a way that's almost like pathological at times. Like, I don't ever want to hurt anybody. It feels like to be hurt.
Yeah.
Well, we're humans. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to hurt other people because we're humans. We're infallible. So not being hard on ourselves when we do make those mistakes. But yes, we're going to attract people that are kind of needing fixing, or are not in tune with their emotions. We don't even recognize sometimes that they're not in tune with their emotions because we're so in tune with their emotions, we don't see that they're not.
Right.
And so, sometimes, yes, with conversations around empaths, we tend to have conversations around narcissists.
Yes.
I just want to acknowledge that I myself don't like to label anybody. I don't like to diagnose people with anything particularly, because I think all of our diagnoses come down to trauma
and
wounds.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so, yes, there are narcissistic people out there, but more so there's people with narcissistic traits. And we can all have narcissistic traits. I know I have narcissistic traits, and I'm an empath. Like, it is possible because we all have those parts of us. We all have the ability to try to manipulate situations because we're trying to get our own needs met. Mm-hmm. And we don't want to shame ourselves for that. We have needs too. And when we're not being respected, when we're not being honored, then we might, as empaths, try to manipulate situations so that we are getting our needs met. Mm-hmm. And in that way, yes, there's some narcissism in that. It's not intentional, but that's what's happening. And so that's why it is important to be aware as an empath, like, what are my triggers? Who am I spending my time with? And seeing energy as like money exchange. Like, would we spend, $50 spending time with this person?
Right.
Maybe we don't want to spend 5 hours of our energy spending time with that person, because our energy is just as important as anything else. It's more important than anything else, being able to, I don't want to say protect our energy, because it implies that we have to kind of be guarded all the time.
Right.
But we want to have those boundaries around ourselves. And again, they can be imaginary boundaries that only we're aware of, or they can be physical boundaries. Like, we're telling somebody, I can see you on Tuesday for 2 hours, but I cannot come over this weekend. Right. So we're setting that very clear boundary.
How do you grow into, understanding what your boundaries are? Because I think so much of that, and part of the awakening process is coming in to recognize the boundaries that were not there or established, right? And so much of that is also rooted in like identity, and like you're like having a sense of self, is what I should say, having a sense of self, right? How does one begin to start to explore boundaries, and implementing those boundaries in order to safeguard, in a way, their own energy?
Yeah. I think for empaths, it's look at the places that you get angry, irritable, and frustrated. When you are getting angry or frustrated with somebody, that's a sign that you need a boundary there, that you are feeling burnt out, that you are giving too much, and you need to kind of check in that scale. Mm-hmm. What I suggest for my clients who are highly sensitive people or empaths is, especially starting a new relationship, looking at, what is this person showing up for me, or how much are they giving me? Are they giving me 20%? Or are they giving me 80%? If they're giving 20%, matching them, matching that energy, not trying to give more, meeting them with what they're giving us. And then recognizing like, what is our limit for what we need from our relationships? If it's, I need at least 40% of somebody pouring into me, then anybody who's pouring less than that, we let them go. We don't hold on to those relationships because it's harming us to give away our own energy, to be constantly trying to show up for them, help them, hold their hand through something when they're not giving that balance back to us, when they're not, showing up and reciprocating for us.
I love the way that you put that in percentages, because I think that helps people to have a picture of that sort of what reciprocity is, because it's not about equality, that it's completely equal, but it's that it's meeting you, it's meeting your needs, right?
It's in a range where your needs are getting met too.
Right. Okay.
I think it's also just like really exploring what we need, like really looking at like, what do I need?
Why is it so hard? Why is it so hard, Sarah?
I know it is so hard because we're so used to meeting everybody else's needs.
Yeah.
But we don't even know how to read our own needs.
Yeah. Yeah. And even in communicating boundaries, like that can feel hard because of conflict, but there's a root to those fears, right? I'm uncovering myself and what I've heard with other people who are talking about, as people are going through their own awakenings and these hard transitions and stuff in life, is so much rooted to an abandonment story, right? Yeah, like in being able to voice, like how can one find empowerment in voicing their boundaries or expressing their needs if that feels hard for them?
Yes, it's such a great question. And I think so often empaths in particular are so conflict avoidant and they don't want to set boundaries because they recognize like, okay, if I have this conversation, this person's not going to like what I have to say. They're going to be upset. Then I'm going to have to manage their upset. Then I'm going to have to manage my upset about their upset. That's just too much. I'll just let them keep doing what they're doing. Also, you kind of have to think about that. So, as a result, Emperor's like, no, I'm just not going to set any boundaries. But that's so counterproductive for us. And it's not helpful for us. So boundaries, like this is something I used to be really afraid of too. And now some of my friends called me the boundaries queen. And I'm like, what, me? Like, because I'm just not used to being good at setting boundaries. And yet now I am. And I'm like, I don't even believe that I'm good at it, but I am. So for me, I realized I was making it out to be so dramatic. Because what I thought I needed was asking so much. And I realized like, I'm not asking for much. Like I'm asking for like 2% here. Like the tiny
just a little bit. Yeah.
Just a tiny bit, right? Like, and so I was realizing like I had this kind of desperation of like, they're probably going to say no. They're probably not going to be able to. So why bother? And I had to let that go. And I had to just be open and neutral and like, let's see how this goes. It helps to practice with people who love us and who are willing to honor and respect our boundaries. And we can let them know like, hey, I'm really trying to work on my boundaries. Can I practice with you? Can I practice setting boundaries with you? And can you give me feedback on how that's going? So that's a great way to do it. But then the other thing is just to take the drama out of it and ask for our boundaries to be met as if we're ordering a sandwich at a restaurant. Like, hey, I know that I plan to do this with you, but this week was actually really hectic and crazy. Would it be okay if we scheduled next week? It doesn't have to be dramatic.
Yeah.
And then I've also learned, and thanking people, thank you so much for understanding that I need that before they even like have the chance. Because when we're thanking somebody, we're like, they're already going to feel good about that. And then they're going to want to do that because they know that we feel good about it too. When we give people the tools, they're going to want to take those tools because they want to understand us better. Yeah. And so I don't look at boundaries as a negative thing of like, we're putting up this wall between me and you. Boundaries means I want to continue to have a relationship with you. This is what I need in order for me to do that, in order for me to be able to show up as my best self. Yeah. And so being able to express that to people, like, I want to show up for for you in my best way.
Yeah.
In order to do that, I need to stay home and rest this weekend so that next weekend I can really be there for you.
Yeah. Oh, I love that, Sarah. What happens when people, as they are coming into an understanding, right, and start working with these boundaries, start working through and expressing their needs and uncovering what those things are? Um, what are ways of putting in practice these pieces that I want to say that feel authentic, right? And not because what I sense and what I feel is like this need to, when you start doing this like growth and development work, right, then you're like, I'm going to start and like do this with other people or for other people, right? And sort of comes out this like I'll call it kind of like a savior complex, right? Like I'm gonna come and do all this stuff, right? And um what I've recognized is that there's a balance and a medium of understanding where people are at, right? Like as we can open to awakening and we can be trying these things on for ourselves, there's also recognizing that, everybody has their path. Everybody has their own process of working through these things, and you can want to like dive in and want to wake other people up and bring them along with you. But can you share a little bit on how to relax into things, right? And where we're actually trying to get to around how we truly can assist and help communities and the world and make an impact and serve and all those things that empaths want to do in a way that's really authentic and empowered and where we are right now.
Yeah. Such a great point and such a great question, especially I think, like I am a white person, so I'm very aware of that like white savior complex of like, we're gonna fix everything. It's not necessary, right? And it's really actually
Right.
taking away from what we need to be focusing on. So
Yeah.
yes, I think that empaths have this savior complex at times. And what is important to understand is that we are all sovereign beings. We all have our own path to walk. We all have our own lessons to learn, and we have them on our own time. That, we can want to pull people to where we are now, but they may not be ready. And like you said, like really meeting people where they are and recognizing that we can actually cause harm by trying to help people. And this is really hard for me as a therapist because I'm like, I want to help everybody.
Yeah.
But sometimes trying to help people is actually taking away their ability to help themselves. And that was something I really had to learn is like, where is that balance between me wanting to help my clients and me trying to do it for them versus me trying to empower them? And I know that you are capable of doing this yourself. I know that you have the best answer for yourself. I can't give you that answer. You know yourself best. So being able to give people the gift of believing in them versus trying to do it for them of like, oh, I know what's right for you.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty egotistical. We don't know what's right for anybody else. We may have a better idea of how it worked for us, but that's how it worked for us. And it's not necessarily going to work that same way for other people. And so that's something I tell my clients is what works for me doesn't work for you. And so I'm here to help empower you figure out what works for you and help you find how to learn how to do that for yourself in their life.
I love that. I love that. One of the conversations that we had around being an empath and yes, this term narcissism, or being narcissistic, right, and how we can have those qualities that's just about being disempowered and really about our wounds and our trauma. There's this term that I've heard used called the dark empath.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't quite sit with me because I feel like when it comes in the way that it's presented, it sounds like very narcissistic tendencies. But I don't believe in this idea of darkness and that seeing empaths who are disempowered as dark people. And I do think that there is a very I think there is an actual line between being an empath and really being rooted like hardcore in that ego, where there's narcissistic components happening. But I would love to hear from you about this term dark empath and what we really need to be looking at and assessing when it comes to as an empath, how we can be in our power and what needs to be reflected upon to not reflect on this term, but rather can we focus on like what it is to actually be an empath and grow from that, right?
Yeah.
Rather than labeling people as a dark empath. It just doesn't sit right with me.
Absolutely. Speaking through a spiritual lens, I think empaths, they're susceptible to negative energies that aren't just human. So if we're looking at like entities, for example, empaths are going to be more susceptible to entities or to other negative energies coming in and impacting them, especially if they are unaware. And I think it's so important to kind of differentiate like the wounded empath versus the dark empath, that it comes from pain. It comes from not knowing who they truly are, not understanding what's happening to them. Like I was talking about in the very beginning, I dealt with so much anxiety and depression when I was younger because I just didn't know what was going on with me and that I was a highly sensitive person and an empath. And I think for people who would be labeled as dark empaths, it's just, they don't know that they're taking on so much energy in the world and they're feeling really heavy by that. They're feeling really depressed. They're feeling maybe suicidal tendencies because they don't feel comfortable being themselves in the world because the world is so overwhelming for them.
Yeah. It's really interesting. I think when it comes to how we move forward in the world together, right? And where we are minded and going, so often it's about our mindset and what I love what you always say, or what you say, is about being to be thinking about what it is that you want more of, like what it is you want, what it is you want to create. And the inner critic that exists, right, that gets in the way of our ability to create from that space. And what could be helpful for people who are awakening to themselves as an empath or an HSP, how to actually move into that space of their sensitivities and their gifts, right? And being able to support or to step into their purpose, I guess is what I want to say. Anything that they could do right now for themselves to help grow and open to their gifts and sensitivities in the ways that they want to be of service in the world.
Yeah. I think a big part of that is just recognizing our own energy, recognizing how we want to be showing up in the world, what does drain us, what does deplete us, and how we like making sure that we're constantly pouring into ourselves and making sure that we're staying very full. And just like really taking care of our energy, really practicing self-care, practicing those boundaries, setting our intention, considering like what kind of people make us feel good, make us feel safe, make us help us feel expanded. Who are the people that help us feel like we have to shrink and hide away? I think a big thing for empaths is just recognizing how much of themselves, including that inner critic, has been a protective part. How many protective parts empaths carry to try to save them from taking on so much in the world. So working with those parts, the inner critic, and saying like, oh, I see that you've been here to protect me from putting myself out there in a way in which I would get hurt or in a way in which I wouldn't be well received. How can I work with this inner critic in a way that we're working together to protect me, and that I can still go out in the world and I'm not going to be harmed.
Oh, I
So
love
it's like
that.
befriending those parts and, those shadow parts instead of shunning them.
Shunning them. Yeah, start to embrace them and integrate them in, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, anything else that you might want to share with
Mm-hmm.
our audience tonight?
Yes, I want to share one of my favorite tools. This is something that I use anytime I start to feel like, oh, I'm picking up on somebody else's energy that is not mine.
Uh-huh.
It's called the sponge mantra, and I can type this up or have it typed up, but I can send it to you and, type it
Yeah,
up on
got it.
our
Yep.
conversation tonight on Facebook. It's also on my Instagram. It's posted there, and I can give you the information about that as well. But the sponge mantra, because as empaths, we're just always, absorbing everything.
Uh-huh.
So being able to place our hand on our heart, ground ourselves in our bodies, take some deep breaths, and then repeat the sponge mantra, which is, I am not a sponge for other people's emotions, energies, thoughts, ideas, whatever word you want to put in here. I do not absorb other people's thoughts, feelings, emotions. I do not leak my emotions, my thoughts, my feelings onto anybody else. I am not responsible for anybody else's stuff. I am only responsible for me and my life. I release anything I'm carrying that does not belong to me. And then I imagine kind of a protective bubble around me. It's different other day, like some days it might be blue, some days it might be yellow. So it's just kind of like what I'm feeling in that moment. Sometimes I think about, do I need strength in this moment? What color represents strength? Do I need hope in this moment? What color might represent hope to me? And then I imagine that bubble around me. So, again, keeping my energy in, keeping other people's energy out of that bubble. And then I feel much more safe going out into the world, being around other people, going to grocery stores, going to the grocery restaurants, whatever.
Oh, I love that. Oh, yes. Okay. So that will be shared, you all, in the description section of this video. You'll be able to come, and if you're catching us here at the end and you want to catch us on the replay, this will be here on Facebook for the rest of the week, but then it'll be taken down. But you can watch the replay on our YouTube channel, Meant for More. That's with 2 O's, MOORE. And that we will share all this information, so you'll be able to have access to that for sure, as well as Sarah's information, how to connect with her, if you want to let people know now how to connect with you if they want to.
Sure. So you can connect with me through my website, which is nurturedessence.com, or through my Instagram at nurturedessence. On my Instagram, I post tons of stuff about highly sensitive people, empaths, affirmations, different songs to help you feel good, move your body, work through any of that heaviness that we're all carrying right now.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And I love your stuff, Sarah. And I feel like you are I feel like you're my personal, like the holistic psychologist. I know a lot of people follow her, but you're very akin to that. So if you know the holistic psychologist and you love that kind of content, you are going to love Sarah's content. So definitely check her out on social media and follow her, because you're great. I love all the stuff that you're putting out there and the work that you're doing.
Thank you so much.
Yes. Thank you so much for being with us, Sarah. And thank you everyone for joining us tonight and joining this conversation. Let me know where you are. Are you an empath? Are you an HSP? Are you an empath and HSP? Are you going through an awakening process? Have you come through one? Let us know and share your story with us and connect with us here in this space. What I love so much about what we're doing here is it's about creating community and inviting this space for people to connect and to share wisdom and knowledge and experience, because we're not alone in this life, and we're going through these journeys, we're going through these shifts together, and it's just important and wonderful to have spaces where you can share and dive into this stuff.
Yes, absolutely. Community is so, so important right now. And I just want to thank you so much for letting me be a part of this and be a part of your journey and your path too. It's really exciting.
Yeah, I'm just so glad we're connected. So
Me too.
great. Yes, and share the same name. Sarah,
Yes,
Sarah squared tonight, you guys.
absolutely.
So thanks for joining us, everyone, and have a great rest of the week. And I will see you in the next episode of Meant for More. Bye.